Mine's already
Oh
started.
my god.
Okay.
Mine's
Oh.
okay. It's starting.
Wait,
It's starting.
wait.
Okay.
I have to restart it though.
Okay. You know what? I'm just gonna keep this in.
This is
Okay, we're good.
No, this
Mine's
would be
fine.
the blooper.
Okay. So, welcome to the weekly discussion for TOK. We're going to be talking about things that TOK has given us. So, in the first topic, our base topic, the teleological perspective of COVID versus the scientific perspective of COVID. Now, as we know, like the scientific perspective of COVID is like, keep your masks on, keep 6 feet distance away from people just so you don't spread the virus. But there is also a teleological way of looking at it, in which there has been a debate between individualism versus collectivism. So let's talk about that. What are your thoughts? How do you think this even came about? Should have COVID just been scientific? And is the teleological hurting is a teleological way of looking at COVID hurting us rather than benefiting us? So go ahead.
I think we can tell why some people need the theological way of thinking of COVID by trying to make a meaning out of it and how to interact with other humans. But the way that we kind of politicalized COVID has, in the end, kind of harmed us greatly as in America because of how our disease interaction hasn't been the best interaction.
It's okay.
definitely
Going on.
I agree with Cindy 100%. I feel like while we should look at things from every perspective, obviously we should look at things from the teleological perspective and the scientific perspective. It has the politicization of COVID has definitely harmed us more than helped us, because it's stopped us from actually considering the scientific side. It's kind of put us into this, I guess, conceptual monoculture, if since we're only seeing things from one perspective and we're not accepting all perspectives.
I think teleologically, when you look at things teleologically, you kind of make everything in the situation that might be scientific into a belief. So what Cindy said with the masks, it's people, you can't be against masks. People who make it into something about belief, I don't believe that we should do this. The politicization. I think that it's against my freedoms. I believe in my freedom, so I don't believe in masks. But in that perspective, it's completely ignoring the science of okay, but the mask is gonna help you, so probably should.
Another thing is how sometimes theologic way of thinking can bring a community together, and with democracy, and if we work together, and if the theological way of looking at it could have brought us together, then that would have benefited us a lot more than how instead this theological way of looking at COVID kind of took us apart, and now we have this cognitive dissonance of how we should treat the disease, with both theological and scientific why kind of just hitting each other with the politicalization of COVID, and then the scientific way of just looking at the disease as a disease instead of oh, if I do this, then I'm going against my party's belief, or if I do this, I go against that. And
yeah, I think teleology could have been a very powerful tool when the pandemic first started that we really haven't used. We've really only used it for politicization, like you guys have said, which only harms us. But if we had used it and made meaning of the virus early on as just another hurdle we have to cross as a nation, it would have been easier to get people to do things to wearing masks. It would have been a more collective mindset than the individualistic one we've taken on.
I think a large part of the problem was because this whole coronavirus outbreak happened around an important election that is filled from both sides. And so the politicians are using anything to make themselves look better, the people who are voting for them. And this was one of their ways of saying, I know what I'm doing and you don't. And it kind of stemmed from there.
Jackson, you talked about the different, I guess, uses of teleology at the beginning of the pandemic. Could you like elaborate on how that could help COVID, at least in the beginning of the pandemic?
I was just thinking, like, if our government leaders, instead of coming out with their individual, like, meaning that they've made of the pandemic, their individual, like, political ideas, if they had presented, like, a unified front saying that the coronavirus was just one issue that we need to, like, tackle, and that we'll get over it like we've gotten over the issues in the past, instead of politicizing it, it would have been a lot easier to unite the nation. It's like
I agree.
oh yeah.
Oh,
I was gonna say,
continue.
okay, I'm sorry. I was gonna say, like, in the world wars, it's very common to see, like, governments putting out posters with, like, Uncle Sam or Rosie the Riveter to try to, like, turn the war away from something that can really be politicized and towards something that is already has a meaning as patriotic, which unifies the nation.
See, I feel like we have been doing that in a way, except it's not effective at all, like the other examples you've done. Because with the like war example, I immediately thought about how, like in the beginning when they were talking about it, they called it like the secret enemy. What do they call it? The like invisible enemy that we're at war with in the press conferences. That's what they call it. They framed it like a war. So I kind of saw that as them attempting to like rally patriotism behind it, and then also in all of the press conference briefings that I've seen, they do it in a very nationalistic way. So instead of like positive patriotism, like, you know, we're doing a good job, we can get over this, it's more aggressive. It's like the other countries, they're not doing it, but here we're doing it like way better than anywhere else. And I think in that way, it's still kind of negating the scientific perspective because we're basing it on our belief that America's doing great when that's not always the case, and that's obviously not the case when you look at like the numbers.
Yeah, it
Agree
definitely.
with that. Yeah. Oh, you can go. Keep going. It's fine.
Yeah, no, it definitely plays into like that individualism versus collectivism, because we're not thinking of each other as like it's framed like nationalism is framed as if like we're thinking like, oh, we're unified as a country, but in reality it's more of like what I want to do and what my rights are. We're thinking of like rather we're pushing our beliefs onto other people rather than being like, hey, we should come together and collaborate and help people build up together rather than like.
And we really.
Oh yeah, no, go on. No, I was gonna like ramble anyway.
Oh, you were finished? Okay. I was gonna say we really only come together against something, but there's really nothing to be against. Like there's no I guess foreign enemy right now that we can really like combat. Like no one is making us do these things that are harming ourselves. We are harming ourselves, you know? So I would say that, you know, the coronavirus and that entire situation and the theological version of it has only split us up and made us more, I guess, individual rather than bring us together as Jackson would want us to.
You brought up a very good point that I want to kind of just touch more on. I think in the beginning, or not even in the beginning, they're still trying to do this, but they're trying to make like the common enemy China still, right? With calling it, you know, the Chinese virus, the China virus. And they're trying to do that patriotism, nationalism, propaganda thing where, you know, we can come together as a country and go against this, and we have one common enemy we want to go to. The government's not evil. We're not doing anything wrong. We should put all our faults onto that one country that started everything, right? But I think because of the globalization of news and media nowadays, I think the people are just a lot easier to get news and different news compared to before, where it was really easy just to spread like propaganda messages and rival up the crowds to get them united as one. But now we kind of just get more side news, and we can see how like how everybody is, and I think we're just more human. We can humanize each other a little bit more than.
Yeah, I like the idea that all of you brought up, and how like pushing the blame onto other people. Like we discussed this in global politics last year on how putting like all of your problems, like all of these problems are caused by the other. It's caused by those external factors. And you're unified because you have that common enemy, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're unified. The phrase of like the enemy of my enemy, wait, what is it?
Is my friend.
Yeah, the enemy of my enemy
Is my
is my
friend, yeah.
friend. But then what if like after like that common enemy is gone, what's going to happen between the two nations that are together that were unified because of that common enemy? They fight and they have these problems, and these problems emerge. It's not the problems are not caused by the common enemy, and by pushing the blame onto other people is not helping your case at all. Instead, it's just delaying the actual situation and dilemmas that's going within your country onto other countries as well.
I think you could say the same for the opposite. That haven't you heard the term the silent majority? People think that there will always be other people to back them up, and that doesn't work either. And so people aren't taking responsibility for something they brought upon themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah,
People
I
not
agree.
taking responsibility is like an issue. Go ahead, Jackson.
Oh yeah, I agree. What I was suggesting earlier with the like sort of like patriotic perspective wasn't necessarily like pushing the blame off, rather like taking the virus, like the current situation, and like rallying around it. Not using it as a scapegoat or anything, but like taking responsibility about what we have to do, and in that way unifying. Not using any, oh, we're America, we're so much better than everyone else. Send you up.
I think for Wi-Fi.
Yeah, it's been glitchy, but
Okay.
yeah, that's what I was thinking. Less of a we're America, we're better than everyone else, we're gonna beat this virus. More, this is the situation, let's deal with it together.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, did you want to say something?
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that because we didn't the president didn't really handle the situation of COVID correctly. Rather than treating it as something as scientific, he thought of it as like a hoax and something that he can use for as a gain of of political gains. And people fell for it, and it's probably due to like the people's biases that leads to them to believe in these misinformation, like believing that the COVID was a hoax at first, or now that the COVID is like they realize that it's an actual thing, they think that they'll put chips in like the vaccines and like track everyone's information and invade their privacy. But no, that's just not true. And of course, when you're skeptic, it's important to question your surroundings and everything around you, but there comes to a point where you have to place that trust onto someone else and trust that they will give you the right information to lead you onto the right path. However, they've misplaced that trust onto someone that's not knowledgeable in their fields, but rather in someone that plays into their emotions and can persuade them with their language.
I
They
think the
think-
place.
You go.
Okay. I think the place that they put their trust also shows like their biases, because it just is so much easier for them to, I guess, question the majority, or question the virus, or question what's happening with that and the pandemic, and I guess find the scapegoat and put the blame onto other people and just not accept responsibility. And that is the main, I guess, problem in this entire politicization of the coronavirus, is because people have these biases just to live their life how they've always lived their life. They won't accept the problem, and they won't seek out a solution.
Yeah, denial. Go ahead,
I
The
think
Ariana.
it
problem is
also kind of just by kind
Oh,
of
wait.
crowding around somebody else.
I'm sorry. Ariana wanted to speak second,
Oh,
so
okay.
like,
the,
I
the
didn't
problem
see it,
is
sorry.
it's fine. The problem is that you say that they're questioning the virus. I think they're not questioning anything. They're going with what the president says. They're not questioning anything he's saying. He says it as it is. He says the truth. And so they're not questioning it at all. You can go,
That's what I was kind of gonna go
Mhm.
about. I was gonna say that Trump's the people that kind of believe and follow what Trump says, they kind of other people that have similar beliefs to justify their own, and because of that, they're able to then be skeptical of more concrete beliefs that have evidence that back them up. That's actually real evidence, and because of that, they can say that that what they think is real because everybody else in that group also has like their own evidence and their own grounds and their own kind of so then they have this idea that what they're saying, they just keep on building on top of each other, and because of that kind of leads them to this bubble where they can't escape.
I think they lack in the trait of thinking about others and putting themselves in other people's shoes.
Empathy?
Empathy, yeah. That's it. They've lost it.
yeah, I agree with that. Because self-interest, um, self-interest can turn into altruism, because it's like what Audi discussed in his video about epistemology, and how, well, like he used the example of pain, and how if this hurts me, well, then I wouldn't want to impose that pain onto other people, and therefore you become a kinder person. But it seems like these people can't get out of their own heads, and rather than building beliefs on evidence that's reliable, they build their beliefs onto finding other people that have those beliefs. They're not open-minded to other possibilities, that there's probably other perspectives on like the topics going on.
And I think a great deal of that mindset comes from American individualism. People are so like ingrained to want to protect their freedoms and their rights that if they're asked to do something like wear a mask or take a vaccine, there are people that believe that infringes on their right and won't do it to benefit the whole. America's, in my mind, has become too individualistic for its own good. Like, it's important to always be looking out for and protecting your freedoms, but if you place your trust on a bad source, you're going to be not even protecting your own freedoms, but just making bad calls of when you need to protect your freedom.
Being individual and protecting your rights sounds great on paper, but the sad truth is that you're not an individual state. It's a country filled with, it's a very diverse country at that, and they need to understand they're the only ones living in it.
Yeah, but you can't also take it the exact opposite way and say that we need to be 100% collectivistic, I don't think. Because when you do that, you fall into, like, I don't know, I don't know a good example, but like
I mean,
leaving your freedoms behind for the group.
I feel like something that parallels the individual, like your arguments for you, Jackson, is like just a self-care. We've placed uh, self-care is very important, because if you don't care for yourself, then you're not capable of caring for other people. You need to take care of yourself and make sure that you're fine, and that your mental health is fine, and that you're physically capable of and mentally capable of caring for other people, and then you can go and become and help other people that are in need, because we can help other people, but it's not going to how do I say this? It's not healthy to always care for other people, because that could lead to the destruction of our own being, because we're not looking out for ourselves, and we're ignoring our own needs. There needs to be that healthy balance of caring for ourselves and then caring for others. I'm not saying that you should rely on one or the other. There just needs to be a balance.
I think that definitely presents this trait in the U.S. I guess I was just thinking about this trait of like immediacy, because you would think that they would care for themselves, because if they care about this virus and they focus on this virus more, then they can, I guess, be free in the future. They can, do whatever they want in the future once we go on lockdown and once we start quarantining ourselves and start distancing ourselves. Then they can help themselves in the future, and that could still work toward to helping their self-interest. But they don't even consider that. They wanna have their freedom, and they want to have it now, and they don't want it any time else, and they won't sacrifice anything for that. So I think this definitely shows the trait of, I guess, immediacy within America. This like, we have to do it now and we can't wait, and it's just like we have to use every moment, for its potential or whatever. And I guess it just shows that.
Mm.
Yeah.
Like instant gratification of sorts.
Yeah,
I feel like
exactly.
it kind of it ties into, I don't know, with what Yvonne said, with like paralleling the self-care with like pursuing, your own interests rather than what's better for the rest of the people. I think it's kind of interesting to try and put myself in the shoes of the people who are like, oh, I'm not going to wear a mask because it violates like my personal freedoms. You have to think like, because you said, it's important to take care of yourself first so that you can stay healthy and take care of yourself. I wonder if, from their perspective, their freedoms being denied in this case is like a personal endangerment to them. It's interesting to see the priorities, because they see like health and liberty at the exact same level. So I think that's also why it's so politicized, because with this health issue, it's apparently in some people's eyes counteracting freedom. It's a direct like opposite to that.
I think it also comes from like a place of ignorance,
Definitely.
where yes, we don't look beyond their news source. And while I think I also sometimes fall into that, while I might just only watch what is it, CNN, because that's just how I lean towards more than Fox News. But I feel like you kind of box yourself in, and then you're stuck with that ignorance, and then from that ignorance and the people you see and the people you also around, you just spiral down into this situation.
Yeah, I definitely think that's one of the root causes of all of this, because I know from personal experience, both of my sets of grandparents, if they're going to turn on the news, it's going to be Fox. And like, they won't take any other perspectives. They believe entirely what's on Fox News, when the way to truly combat this is to like watch as much as you can to see all of the different perspectives on it.
Because news nowadays is not an unbiased thing.
No.
Everything, a lot of it is propaganda, a lot of it is fake news, a lot of it's kind of opinion based, and it's really hard to. I think the best way is to get globalized news from other countries, to see how they kind of reflect how America's doing, with how our news is very based on politics. Even when things aren't supposed to be about politics, they make it about politics, and it makes sense because we are in the middle of an election for Trump and Biden, and it makes sense why news would be politicalized. But like, if we want to get like, I guess, more unbiased kind of points of views, we will have to look outside of our country, which is kind of sad to think that we can't find.
I disagree on your point on how like news can be politicized. Like, yeah, they can be politicized, but should they be? I mean, news is information given by people who research on all of these situations going on and all of these occurrences going on, shouldn't it be unbiased? It should be as objective as possible. That way the people watching it can form their own opinion rather than being tricked by the language that they use, and like how some news sources use certain words to give off a certain connotation to make people lean towards one side.
I agree with you. I agree that's what news should be. That's like what we all want news to be. That's what we believe news should be. Something that's unbiased, and it should be the facts, and then we ourselves can make our opinions. But I just don't think that's how the current media is at all. You know, and
Yeah,
Fox
no,
News
definitely.
by itself is, you know, it's owned, the owner is Robert Murdoch, who is a very conservative person, and it's always been a very not left, right, conservative news channel. Oh, I almost made a mistake there, but it's just one of those just channels where it's like it's kind of always been with politics, Fox News, because of its owner.
I mean,
And
oh, go on.
like the way that everything's written and stuff, it's like how it's the language is very politicalized too with how our media is. And I think, you know, we would all agree that we want media that is unbiased, but I just think that is not possible. Even if like we also have unconscious biases, right? So even if we think it's not biased, but we will still portray that news in a certain point of view with how we understand, you know?
Correct. It's human nature to be biased.
Exactly.
You can try to question the world around you and think differently ways. You know what you know, and it's very hard to know about what you don't know.
Mm.
Yeah, and oh, I thought someone
You
wanted
go.
to speak. Okay. Speaking of like biases and media, this all also relates to Persepolis. You know how in Johnston that we're talking about Orientalism. Anyone? I want to go off of that
Oh.
topic, that loaded potato.
I love talking about this.
That potato.
Well, I wish we could have talked about it today, but
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Go
I
off
think
then.
one thing that I thought was really interesting and just not fun to see, but also sad to just acknowledge is that we have so many good examples of what to do and what not to do outside. You know, China had the pandemic first, you know, had the disease first. They were going through it, and we saw it. You know, we were watching from afar. We saw all the news. You know, we were kind of like, oh, okay, cool, but then they were able to control it, and then we got it right, and then New Zealand got everything under control, and Korea got their stuff under control, and we had so many good examples of what to do, right? Things that we could have copied, things we could have just been, okay, cool, let's think about that. But then we have, I think, as a country, we have this idea where America's number one, right? We can't do anything wrong. We're the global powerhouse, you know, we have the power, we can't do anything wrong. And so because of that, or like I think just how everything is taught in schools and stuff, that kind of leads us into this scenario we have now.
I feel like Americans and American culture as a whole is really unwilling to take advice from external sources because we have this perception of ourselves. We want this identity that we're self-sustained, that we're doing it all on our own. You know, we're the global powerhouse, like Cindy said, where we can do it on our own and we don't need anybody else to sustain our
We are the
economy or
example.
anything. Yeah, we don't need an example. We are the example. Right?
That's not true. This country's built up on other
people.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Other
yeah,
communities.
We like to ignore that.
Our patriotism is really strong in this. And I'm not saying patriotism is wrong, it's great to love your country, but I think there's a point where patriotism kind of falls into nationalism, and we kind of get blinded by our love for our country, and we refuse to look out
turns into propaganda.
And then the media becomes, everything's bad, and we get stuck in this situation where nothing is right, nothing is true, everything's going wrong, and we're in the middle of a pandemic.
It definitely.
And we still think we're great.
And we still think we're number one.
Exactly.
We're number one in numbers.
It feeds into Orientalism, definitely, because we see ourselves as this big, amazing powerhouse that doesn't need any help. So we should help others because they need our help, and we're supposed to set the example, even though we're a terrible example ourselves. And that's why I feel like that could explain Orientalism and how we, I guess, assume since we're so great that we should help others, and like that kind of like white savior complex, where we try to, I guess, even though we're trying to help them, we actually hurt them in the process, but we can do no wrong. So we're not hurting them, we're helping them. There's not a bunch of people dying in the Middle East because of us.
Whenever people bring up that subject, I just think of Vietnam War.
Yes.
Speak, Jackson.
Oh, yeah, no. I was going to say, like, the way we've fallen into nationalism definitely is harmful. I mean, like Kalea said, all you have to do is look at the Middle East and all the problems we caused there, thinking we were on a sort of holy crusade to fix the Middle East. But I think that does come from a place where, for a while, America genuinely was like a leader to the world. Someone really wants to comment.
Someone's like, you guys are talking about Orientalism? What are we doing?
I really want to comment on that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think
I
think for a while, especially like after the First World War, and for maybe like a decade or two into the Cold War, there was a time where like an argument for America's greatness was very easy to make. But I feel like it's the patriotism that Americans felt because like the idea that like we swooped in and saved World War II from defeat, or that we were fighting this great Russian communist powerhouse. I think it has become bastardized, especially because of Vietnam and our involvement in the Middle East, where we still think we're that great power that we were back then, which to some degree you could still argue we are, even though we've been making mistakes. But because of those issues, we still believe we're this like super amazing, can do nothing wrong thing, when we've just been screwing up since pretty much the 70s.
I think we've always had mistakes, like even back then, even when we were that powerhouse, even after like the First World War, we still had mistakes, we still let things happen, we still could have fixed things. There's always like good and bad, and while we can see ourselves as this great power, we are one of the top countries, but we still have definitely weaknesses. There's always like a good balance in history, even now, and it was back then too.
Oh yeah, I agree. America's definitely had its fair share of problems. What I meant was that it was harder to deny like America's positive influence on the world in that era, even though we were doing bad things. In that era, the net positive kind of outweighed the bad things we were doing, which you can't really say in the modern era.
I think we were really lucky in as like the wars weren't fought directly in America, right? So meaning our economy and stuff could have kept on going. We were able to keep on building things while other countries kind of had to stop production, and they were being bombed and everything, right? So that kind of like benefited us in becoming a powerhouse, because we kind of just undid everything. We were making a lot of money during the wars because
factories and such.
These factories, we were still able to make things happen, right? And because of that, we were able to become like a really good and we were able to become a powerhouse, I think, because of that.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think it's really funny how for a country that likes to be in every other country's business, we're like, that globalization is really interesting, but then we're still a very individualistic kind of America by itself, even though we like to think that we're actually helping other countries, but in the end, we're still individualistic.
Yeah, it's and it's not only just America. I feel like a lot of like the Western countries and nations do play off of that exploiting exploiting like other countries and like modern imperialism. Like for example, going back to the Middle East, I'm pretty sure there was like this one example that the video gave us. I forgot the guy's name. Saeed. Yeah. There was one
Saeed.
example that he
Yeah.
gave how like Napoleon Bonaparte, like he not only brought an army to the Egyptian society, he also brought scientists and all of these intellectuals to record the how society works in Egypt, and it that those reports weren't catered to the Egyptian people. Rather, it was distorted in this European view of the Egyptian people, so that you know they have like the so when he gets back and gives the reports to the European nations, there's like this justification that because these reports, they say that they're inferior or less civilized somehow. Therefore, we can use their country and help modernize them and bring in these Western ideals, when really that was just uncalled for.
Would you call that a white savior movement? The white man's always right. It's a way of thinking.
I think so, especially because it was a lot of the European powers doing it. The like primarily white countries that are like swooping in and being like, "Oh, we need to civilize these savages." Similar to how the U.S. did it with the Native Americans. I do think it's a lot of the white savior complex. We need to save them from themselves and institute the Western ideals, which we think are better. And Kale's gone.
Oh no. Was it her Wi-Fi?
Oh,
I think
You
that
good?
idea of like culture
Okay.
is really interesting to talk about too. Like culture, how we think like, oh, a society isn't as civilized as a Western state because they believe in other things, or their traditions are different than the Western, and I think that's just really interesting to see.
I was going to comment on something that Yvonne said before I glitched out. I was going to say with the scientific thing, with Napoleon coming to, I guess, going to Egypt and bringing scientists and bringing people to, I guess, help the Westerners. It was also, I guess, shows bias within, I guess, the scientific community. Just like thinking about how many of the museums and all the stuff that we have are stolen artifacts. They're not, we didn't get permission to take those. We didn't get permission to examine these people. We forced them to comply with our science. So I could also say that while the teleological side is biased, science can be biased too in some aspects.
Is
That's
it
a really interesting point. I wanted to like connect saying like science, doesn't consider like who's, I don't know, I guess who this rightfully belongs to in this situation. Science doesn't take into account people's emotions. Science doesn't take into account people's like history and what they've gone through. And so I think it's interesting to look at how bias exists, because we talked about bias in the teleological live, but I think bias in science is a really interesting perspective that I hadn't really thought about before. Because if we're doing science in the name of, furthering the West and making us more like civilized. If we use science in order to like force other people into things, then it's equally as harmful as the teleological.
Another example could also be how they use science to, I guess, oppress Black people. How they use science to be like, oh, they're less intelligent, or they're, they don't feel as much pain as other races. They use science, I guess, against people. And while that might not be using like what science is meant to do, I don't know, because science, its purpose is only defined by how humans use it. It's not even defined by, or what it's good for is only defined by how we use it, rather than like what it's objectively meant to use. I'm trying to compare it, I guess, to like communism, how communism in theory works, but when we use it, it's, all muddled and doesn't come out right, and it's very biased and terrible. So I guess that could be also how I see science. Like, in theory, it's supposed to be objective and factual and not have any biases or anything, but when we use it, because we as humans are naturally biased, it will always be biased.
That is interesting.
We can also
Oh, no, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna just kind of bring up how the COVID cases and how hospitals deal with how in COVID, with the COVID cases in America, how it's heavily some racial injustice in the hospital care, I think, with the numbers, if we pull that up. Which we might not have time for that. Yeah. The racial gap. Yeah.
Yeah, we could get into
police
brutality and Black Lives Matters, but
I mean, there's always racial injustice in healthcare. There's racial injustice in literally every system. So it's pretty difficult with that. Race, I guess it has this strong correlation with socioeconomic status. So that could also be another thing.
I would have to agree,
there's more Black people, more Hispanics in poverty, therefore their healthcare is not going to be as good. So they're getting more COVID, and that entire side of the story.
Yeah. I think we're
terrible that this all comes from.
No, you can go.
You go. This all comes from slavery. Like this is taking years to recuperate. I don't understand other countries where they did have slavery and whatnot. They don't have these issues. Well, they have these issues, but I feel like they're not as prevalent as they are here.
That I have to disagree with, only because I don't really have enough information on that. Like, how do you know that there's not racial injustice in, Canada or in any of the other European nations?
You're right. So I don't know about the systems there.
Yeah.
Doesn't Canada have a pretty bad police brutality problem as well?
I don't read Canadian news.
I've heard a lot of issues in Canada, specifically with the Indigenous people there. They endure a lot of terrible things from the government. So I feel like racial injustice, it's obviously super, super prevalent here. But even if it's not, exactly the same in other countries, it manifests differently, but it still exists, I think, just about everywhere.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go. No, you can go.
No, because I was gonna kind of go into a different topic. So if you want to add on what Karen says.
Okay. I was going to say, racial injustice. I think people see it as it's not as bad in other countries because they kind of see that as this black and white problem, literally this black and white problem where it's African Americans and Caucasian Americans, and they see that only those two races, but there's so many other people being oppressed racially in other countries, both the entire COVID situation with Asian Americans and seeing that entire prejudice against them, seeing prejudice against Indigenous people. And I guess we have to understand that there's way more minorities than just this on this black and white scale.
I mean, I was going to say, Corinne, if someone from America is calling Canada's treatment of the Indigenous peoples bad, it must be really bad.
Oh my god.
It's not a United States of America problem. It's I mean, the
It's just a
Europeans have a lot
problem.
of places.
It's just
Yeah.
a problem.
They're everywhere.
I mean,
It's a global problem.
we have our
It is.
fair
The
share of
Europeans outnumber.
treating indigenous peoples poorly.
Yeah.
Really poorly.
Our fair share.
we
Poorly.
still
More
we
than our fair
still
share.
do,
Which is why it surprised me
kind of-
hearing
It was never a fair
Well,
share.
Canada's treating pretty bad.
Yeah. But going off from like what Corinne and Ariana says, it's interesting that we really don't know much about global news and like what's going on in other countries. A lot of our media is focused on America. And what's interesting too is that like I was on Reddit and there was this person that said like unpopular opinion, I don't care what's going on in America. Why is it all over my news? And this person was in
I
like
saw that.
what, like Europe? Like they're like in a different country. Why would European countries show American media when, you know, it's kind of not their problem? So,
So I think
Like right now, we're on like the spotlight of the world because of how lunatic it's being run by.
Yeah.
How lunatic it's being run
Yeah.
right
I
now.
mean, we've always kind of been like had a spotlight on America from the world
I
ever
think
since like the War of
Trump's,
1812.
Yeah.
is making people like laugh at us more now.
Oh yeah.
But
We-
also, I think that other countries' news have times for global news compared to how our news is more just focused on our own country. Like China has a segment where it's just globalized news. You know, it talks about other big countries, and they talk about their news and what's happening in other countries. And Korea has the same thing, and you know, England has that kind of. They're similar American other country news. And I find that really interesting how we don't really focus on other countries during our news times, where we're just very like, this is what's happening in America. And maybe that's just because we have a lot of things going on and we just don't have time. But
I doubt it.
I don't know.
I mean,
In a way,
24-hour news cycles.
when you think about it, by only feeding American news, right? Let's say you're not going to go on. Let's just say this is the only news you're going to get, right? You're not going to go up and start research and see what other countries are doing. This is the only news you hear, and it's only about America. It kind of, in a way, is like brainwashing you.
Of course, we think
definitely.
America's the best country on earth because we might as well be the only country.
Yeah, you don't
America
hear
is
anything
the
else.
Earth.
America is the earth. Like,
You become very ignorant.
Yeah, we get all our oil from
Yeah.
the U.S. We get
You
we get
become
everything
very
from the US.
ignorant
Yeah.
everything's
of
there.
outside stuff, and
Yeah.
so you just kind of you're focused on your own country. You don't see how other countries are also not third world countries. You know, they actually have economies and they have streets, and you know, they're actually countries. And sometimes I feel like there's this idea where, you know, America is a first world country and the other westernized countries they're the first world countries and everybody else is not as civilized. And I think that there's a big problem with how we view other countries. And like Orientalism, we have this stereotype of every other country other than the Western ones.
Yeah, and then like that goes back to our capitalistic desires, you know?
Yeah.
Because as long as we're focused on America, we're not realizing the other problems that's going on, or like how America may be using or exploiting third world countries, or third world countries in order to make the stuff that we buy.
We exploit our own people, the low income. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. They exploit those who rely on them.
But I also like what Yvonne says a lot, because we don't realize that a lot of American companies use really cheap sweatshops and, you know,
Made in China.
made in China, or like, you know, and a lot of those are not very well paid. You know, it's like legalized slave work at this point. A lot of these big companies, it's technically just they're just going by. They're getting, you know, it's sweatshops. Young kids, they're getting paid like barely anything to do. And we pay so much money for Nikes or, you know, clothes that are made by a child, and we don't realize that because the rich get richer, and they just, and we just, the
think the
capitalization
worst-
is just there, and what can we do?
Worst part of it all is those who do know continue to buy.
And it's
You can go.
you can
Cindy.
go. No, I've
Oh.
I've dropped
Okay,
something.
I was gonna say even though we know like a bunch of these companies are like preying on the extremely like low income people that work in sweatshops, there's not really much we can do as the consumer, because if we're not buying these big companies, we're more likely to get a worse product or a less reliable product.
Yeah.
In
It's
a lot of cases.
I would have to, I don't know, I feel like we have this idea that because they're brand name, right, that they must be good. We have this, and it's like a thing about materialism, we are so, like, materialism and capitalism feeds on our desire to have everything, and at this point I feel like we work to buy things, but we never enjoy life, and it's because we want to always, like, in global politics we talked about this, we always are seeking for something, right? We work hard to buy something, right? And we think that's going to satisfy us. It's not. It's a brand name, and we think because it's a brand name it has to be good. But I don't, in reality, is it actually as good as we think it is? And sometimes it could be I guess the quality is better or something, but ethically we're letting a child or somebody who's getting like 10 cents a piece for that, is it worth that debate? I think it's kind of interesting. And I've also am just like a slave to capitalism. I also buy things, and I try not to, but there's some things that it's just hard not to
avoid.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's oh no, go ahead.
No, you can go. You can go.
Oh, I was just gonna say that it's sad that we're a victim to this system, It's like we want to change and we want, change now, but it's not going to happen, and it's probably going to happen gradually over our lifetime, but for now, we're victim to our system, and we should do things that would, progress this system better.
We are also stuck in our economic kind of, where we are economically. If we had more money, maybe we could buy from local stores and get things that are local made, or everything is nice. We know where everything is sourced. It's ethically sourced or stuff. But like, it's hard to buy things like that when you don't have the money for it. So we also have to be aware of that, and we can't fault everybody for not buying things that are ethically sourced when it's just easier and cheaper just to buy something that's just there.
Yeah, I had two things that I wanted to say based on Cindy's points. The first was that was like having like brand name things, and in that regard, in like a real like ethical capitalist society, the name brand would be the most popular because it was the most reliable and people bought it because of that. We've gotten to the point that they've like already established themselves to the point that even if their product is worse off, we're still going to buy it. I like to think of like Apple smartphones. They've just been making the same product pretty much for the past like 20
steadily
years.
increasing the
Yeah.
price.
Steadily
Yeah.
increasing the
What?
price.
It's a little bit longer, and now we got rid of the headphone jack, so it's
Yeah,
$1,000, please.
it's 10 times
$1,000.
Now you
better.
have to also buy another thing.
Right? We've made a fundamentally worse product, but buy it.
Yeah.
It's because we're slaves to
and I did.
capitalism. No, we love buying things. We love it. We love that. We love buying things.
It
And that's-
definitely
I mean, oh, go ahead.
connects to that instant gratification that I was talking about earlier, that we just love getting things, and then we're going to use them, and then we're going to get rid of them.
Aaliyah.
Aaliyah.
Oh, it's Aaliyah. Sorry, I just screamed Kayla. Sorry.
You got so
Her
excited.
profile pic literally looks like Kayla. Not gonna lie. Okay, but
No, I
Jackson, you
look
wanted to.
nothing like her.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
the other thing I was gonna say.
Yeah, the other thing you were gonna say.
Oh, I was gonna say it seems like in America specifically, we've taken this like form of like Gilded Age capitalism where we had our own workers in harm's way, children like on like a single like foot wide beam, stirring giant pots of steel.
Are you describing companies or which?
No, like steel
What?
companies. That
But I get it.
Yeah,
it.
no, we understand.
yeah,
that.
we moved it
But
away
it's a
from
witch.
yeah, we moved it away from America and just pushed it off onto
To other
like
countries.
other countries. Yeah, to the point like we say we aren't following that same Gilded Age capitalism, but in reality, we're just not following it with our own citizens. We've pushed it out onto other people.
It's because they don't have laws to protect their own citizens over there. They're not as, they haven't, I guess they just haven't gone through.
Yeah, so many.
They just
Yeah.
gotta get good laws.
Yeah,
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Whoa.
Okay.
No. We should fix the problem. They shouldn't be the
People-
ones to have to make laws to fix the issue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of what, like, of our capitalist beliefs is based on ends justify the means, you know? We are always looking towards that result, like how much money can I make off this? I don't care who I have to sacrifice. I need to accumulate as much money as I need or as I want, you know? And that's just
Yeah.
an unhealthy mindset. That causes harm's way to so many unnecessary people that don't need to be hurt. There's just yeah, we're not looking at a lot of companies don't look at the ethical way of looking at economy. Rather, they're just like, give me money, please. I need more money.
They don't believe that
Without
they
the
can
please, you just give me money.
Oh yeah, not even please.
You don't think they can make money?
Oh.
Oh no.
Cut out halfway.
Aaliyah, can you say something real quick?
Huh? Hi.
Okay, no, you're good. I just had to turn your volume up so that you could be heard.
Oh shoot,
Wi-Fi is really bad.
it's okay.
As you were saying.
As I was
What
saying,
were we saying? I had to talk to my mom
what was
for a
I
second.
saying?
Forgot.
Something about ethics. Oh, that like company owners don't think that they can make money ethically.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to pay people. They don't even pay people fairly in our
Can
own
you?
livable wages. I mean, because we have this idea that everybody has to be millionaires, and because of that, they cut corners, I guess.
Yeah, rather than focusing on the people, they're just focused on the product and distributing as much as they can and as high of a quality as they can to the consumer population. But what they don't take into consideration is the people working. They're just a pawn to them. They work for them and you make the product and that's it. You make the product. The product is what's their focus on rather than the well-being of their people.
I feel like it's like you don't make the product makes you. Like you are the one that is dedicated to the product. It's all about the materialistic things rather than actual people. And I was like, I went down like this little rabbit hole of like ethical businesses and companies. And so I was like, first of all, why are they so expensive? Because like a normal consumer like me in America can't really afford $100 for a t-shirt. And so apparently, like, let's say if all companies were ethically produced and have ethically produced products, then the price of that would go down because like it's like an equal playing field almost. It's kind of interesting to think of it like if everyone is being paid equally, like at a good wage, then somehow that will correlate the prices to go down and making that t-shirt more affordable, because
Money
they're
going
not
into
really
the
focusing.
economy.
Yeah, like they're not really
Yeah.
focusing on like this. Let's say this t-shirt costs like $2 to make. They're not really focusing on like amping up the price so the CEO can get most of the money. It's more like, okay, we're making the price fair so everyone can have a good wage.
Mm.
So like hopefully that will make the employers have enough money to buy something that's also ethical.
They buy that
Yeah.
$2 t-shirt.
I think one of the main issues with like our modern economy is that a lot of like businessmen and women focus more on the knowledge that they gain from their own greed, from their own emotions, rather than the knowledge that they can gain from ethics, which would make a fundamentally better society, I feel, because they wouldn't be looking out for themselves. They'd be looking out for the people working for them, people buying their product. But that would probably take a fundamental overhaul of our current system.
Yeah, I definitely feel like during our lifetime we are going to see this change, but it's not going to be so fundamentally different that it's like it completely changed. No, it's going to be a gradual thing. But I feel like we're in the time where it's going to change, you know? Like, for example, I know this is very US centric, but the US election, Bernie Sanders, he he according to like the American consensus, he was a bit, too progressive in his ideals, and that, we're just not, ready for him. But Joe Biden,
Joe
he's
Biden.
Joe Biden,
I
Joe
feel like
Biden.
Joe Biden.
I feel like he's going
Remember,
into the path of
we
rather
settle for Biden.
I think that rather than going like for Biden, rather than going to the path of like radical change, he's going to be that mediator between Republican and Democrat. So it'd be interesting to see what would come about in his if he gets elected, and what's going to happen during his time of presidency.
Yeah, like you're saying like he's kind of like that mediator. That makes so much sense as like seeing him not as like someone that's going to like change like a drastic change, but sort of kind of hopefully mend the two sides together, or like trying to get that easy transition into like progressive stuff, like, hey guys, maybe we should help our workers more, and like maybe we should be more eco-friendly, and just stuff that would help our society more. Oh yeah, by the way, fun fact, I saw a billboard while driving, and it was a Trump 2020 billboard, and then they were like, Biden's gonna kill all of us and socialism kills. And I was like,
Oh dear.
wow.
Right.
I
We've
Wrap it
been
up.
a little over an hour now. If you guys have said everything you want to say,
Wow.
if there are any topics you guys wanted to talk about that we didn't cover, we can always come back to it next week.
Next
when
time.
we're
Next
recording
Yeah.
it.
week.
Podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Weekly
Podcast.
podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Weekly
just
podcast now that our video's up.
yeah. I guess we can just like talk about whatever.
Again.
Capitalism.
Yeah.
Capitalism. Segue into that.
Yeah, me and
I
Cindy
think
can.
it doesn't really matter what we can talk about because it seems like we just kind of jump topics and
Yeah, we really did.
yeah, no, yeah.
It doesn't.
We went from COVID and then
Around TLK.
Orientalism.
Just give us
Politics,
whatever you
I
see
think-
around the news. Just just
Yeah.
be like, hey, maybe we can talk about this next time. It would be like, no. Next question.
No,
Be quiet.
I think we
Jackson-
title this one COVID and Capitalism.
COVID. We did talk
Yeah.
about capitalism a
That's
lot.
good
We talked about a little
Mm.
ethical consumption. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
I just see, like,
was
COVID,
gonna say
COVID,
something
and then
about
capitalism, and then like a handshake.
consumption.
COVID,
COVID,
capitalism,
capitalism,
consumption.
consumption.
Yeah.
Capitalism,
Yeah.
and handshake.
You know what we should have done? We should have did something
you end
about
the
A,
recording?
and then with
No,
something
I
from
should
B,
end it.
and then something
Bye.
from
Oh
C.
my god, we do the A, B.
We should have did the ABC challenge. Sweet, we got